Good morning, everyone. I want to thank each of our panelists for joining us today and all the those on the line. I think it's a timely topic, and hopefully you'll get some great information out of this. With today's session, we wanted to provide you with an overview of the state of the insurance industry, focusing on property insurance and where it might be headed given the recent storms and claims, not only in the region, but worldwide. Scott Stolmeyer, Managing Director for CGM Gallagher, will kick that session off, providing a big picture with a regional take. We'll also take a look at the claims process, what to prepare for, what to look for, and how to maximize your return within the parameters of your policy. Stan Smith, a licensed adjuster with Smith Orloff Associates, will lead us on that. And finally, we'll hear from a peer, Magnus Aldebeck, General Manager for the Pelican Bay Resort on Grand Bahama. Magnus went through several hurricanes over the past 10 years, the most recent being Hurricane Matthew last year. He'll share with you his practical experiences and lessons learned. All of this is around the backdrop of what you need to do to ensure that you are adequately covered in the future. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We'll begin with Scott.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much, Frank and Adriana, for enabling this forum. I think, as you very rightfully said, it is a timely topic considering the events of the past 2 months. And as you had mentioned, I'm the Managing Director at CGM Gallagher Insurance Brokers. From my end, we have operations in 8 islands throughout the Caribbean. And in particular, we do have an office in Dominica, which was one of the islands affected quite severely during Hurricane Maria. What I wanted to go through perhaps on my slide show here is the effects of the 3 hurricanes, and we affectionately term them HIM, being Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So just a brief oversight of those 3 hurricanes and the effects that they have had. Then we'll have a brief discussion on the rates that the Caribbean as a whole have been experiencing in the past, I would say, 6 to 10 years, and declining rates, and where we believe rates are heading as a result of the past 2 months and the increased activity. And then just a brief discussion on the hardening market. And I was going to chat a little bit about claims, but I think my fellow panelist, Stan, might be better on the claims side. So to kick it off, we did have Hurricane Harvey, which came through the Caribbean. It turned into a Category 4 hurricane that hit Texas on August the 25th. But prior to that, it did pass through the southern Caribbean islands, and in particular, did some damage to Barbados, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, albeit as a tropical storm category. Damages to date range from various numbers, from $70 billion up to as much as $200 billion. And I don't believe that the final figure has really been established as yet. But I think we can safely say we're looking at about approximately $150 billion in damages as a result of Hurricane Harvey. Following Harvey, we had Hurricane Irma that came right behind. It developed into a tropical storm on August 30th and did significant damage to Barbuda, St. Martin, Anguilla, and various of the U.S. Virgin Islands. When it hit, it was a Category 5 hurricane. In Barbuda, in particularly, over 90% of the buildings and vehicles were destroyed, and a significant loss of life in the Caribbean and in the U.S. Again, the damages are still being assessed, but looking in the range of about $60 to $65 billion worth of damages to date. And then right after that, we had Hurricane Maria, which developed into a named storm on September the 16th, and then quickly formed into a Category 5 hurricane 2 days after, which is an amazing short space of time. And you could very easily imagine it's very, very difficult to prepare from what is essentially a tropical storm to then turn into a Category 5 hurricane. It is absolutely mind-boggling. Dominica and Puerto Rico were the two islands most severely affected by this hurricane. Again, significant loss of life in the Caribbean. And again, to date, numbers still being put together, but looking at about $50 billion worth of damages. So from these three hurricanes together, we're in excess of $250 billion worth of damages. So the next topic is what happens to the rates that will be impacting the Caribbean as a result of these hurricanes. Now, I live in Barbados, and I can safely tell you that the rates in Barbados have steadily been declining for about the last 8 to 10 years. So much so that it's been very difficult for the insurance companies to essentially turn a profit, and you hear a lot of crying year after year. But sadly, as a result of this busy season, I don't believe that there's going to be any question in anyone's mind of where the rates are heading. We have already been put on notice from the regional and the domestic insurance companies that rates will be increasing. Some of them have increased already, effective November the 1st. We are still waiting on some other insurance companies to provide their figures as to where they think the rates are heading. But a lot of it will, of course, depend upon the reinsurance market and how their feedback is to the local insurance companies. But the short story to take away from this is that there will be rate increases that will be applied throughout the Caribbean. This leads to what we term as a hardening market. For the short story here, the fact of the increase in premiums and the insurance companies now having to assess the capacity that they can take on and their increased reinsurance costs, we're going to be in for some challenging times in the next few years. One of the items that have been approached, or at least one of the topics that we have been approached, is what can we see out of this hardening market? There are a couple of things that we would like to perhaps suggest, depending on the size of your business. Perhaps a captive is a useful insurance vehicle to look at. What we've also been advising some clients and have actually been putting in place from last year and even the year before has been putting through multi-year coverages, whereby we've been able to lock in a specific rate over a 2 or 3 year period, which helps protect against the volatility of price fluctuations. One of the other items, of course, is just understanding your business, understanding your insurance product that you have, making sure that you have the right coverage, and simply prudent housekeeping. That is pretty much enough from my end. Frank, Adriana, not sure if I am to field any questions here or if to pass it on to Stan.
No, we'll go ahead with, I believe, yes, Stan is next. Stan, are you there?
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Good morning. One little second, let's just go through, let's get to your slides. Okay, 1 second.
I guess
there we go. Just make sure, Stan, tell me when you need to change slides, okay? Just give me a heads up.
Okay.
All right.
Good. Okay. Let me just start off by saying I'm currently on St. Croix, and cell phone service is not the greatest here right now. It's actually pretty bad. Hopefully, I will not get cut off, but I thought I would mention that. I guess in discussing the claim process, everyone has to be proactive and their own advocate. The insurance companies hire their own experts, primarily what's called independent adjusters, that come out to your properties and go through and assess the damages and put together some numbers. That doesn't mean it's always correct, and everybody has to be their own advocate and understand the coverages in your policy. And in preparing a claim, you in essence want to be aggressive, make sure you get everything you can, but at the same time, you have to be aware of what's called an averaging clause or a coinsurance clause. And this goes again to understanding your policies. And in saying that, I think everyone will tend to agree. During the course of every year, you try and control costs, look at the premium that you're paying, and there's a tendency to maybe under-insure a little bit, or even on a very positive approach, select some sublimits for certain perils like windstorm. And in the event that you are underinsured, what can happen there is whatever the loss is that the insurance company adjuster is proposing, and let's just pick a number, what if it's $200,000? If you are underinsured, you'll only get a percentage of that. In an illustration, let's say you have a policy where you have $800,000 worth of coverage, and there's 100% coinsurance clause, and a replacement cost, which the adjuster will calculate on an estimated basis. Let's just say it's $1 million. In that case, you'd only get 80% of whatever the claim is. There are coinsurance clauses more in the U.S. Type policies that operate the same way in essence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 100%. There's also policies that'll say, even though you're underinsured, if you have insured for at least a certain percentage, then you would not be subject to a averaging penalty. And it's important to understand that, because if you're overly aggressive in a claim, then you set yourself up for having the need for a higher sum insured. Also, in understanding your policies, let's just say you selected what we call a sub-limit for windstorm. So say the total replacement value of the property is $5 million, and to save premium, and this is fine, you say, I want coverage of $2 million for windstorm. And in the event that the storm is really bad and you have a loss that exceeds the $2 million, then you have to really understand the policy and see what other coverages might exist. For example, flood. In a hurricane, there's not just windstorm damage, but there's also flood damage. And the flood might not be subject to the sublimit that was stated. And in some cases, in a hurricane, there can be looting and vandalism, either immediately before or after a storm. So that's an additional covered peril, which you can make a claim for. So in some situations, and I have some clients right now, where they selected sublimits for windstorm because windstorm coverage is more expensive, and therefore the premium goes up. So what we did is, in evaluating what the damages are, we identified what damages related to flood, and there was a good bit of vandalism that we then identified. So in the claim process, we're going to be able to exceed the sublimit for the windstorm. But again, that goes to, you need to understand the terms and conditions of your policy and be proactive. And in doing so, like on page 5, Adriana, of the PowerPoint, there's key policy provisions that I'm going to go to. All right. So here's
I can't see the numbers. You just let me know the title.
Policy conditions and coverages. And the list contains replacement cost versus actual cash value, holdbacks, coinsurance, agreed value. All of these conditions should be understood and you should be aware of in the event of a loss. And in reality, all of these should be addressed even in the underwriting of the policy before the policy is put into effect. They're all very key provisions of an insurance policy. Big, right off the bat, replacement cost versus actual cash value. In the case of actual cash value, and some policies are written this way, you never get full replacement value. You'll get a percentage of replacement value that arrives at actual cash value, and the difference is based upon useful life, condition of the property, etc. And in a lot of cases, you do have to request replacement cost. There's coverages for ordinance and code upgrade. If there's significant enough damage to a property, the governmental entities that control issuance of permits and what have you could say, well, you have to do the following to conform to current code. So, I'll pick something. Let's say hurricane clips on a roof, that you didn't have hurricane clips. And if you didn't have it, then the insurance company is not going to pay to put the clips in because they will pay for like kind. That's what the insurance policy provides. But if you have this ordinance or code upgrade coverage, it will provide the additional coverage so that you can then have the money to install the hurricane clips, or even if there's electrical upgrades. And then depending upon the form of the endorsement that provides the ordinance and code upgrade coverage, better forms include language that will allow you to be paid for items that are undamaged, which is important because if you have a big section of the roof that's not damaged, but the local authorities are requiring you to install hurricane clips over there, that's going to be an expenditure. So there is coverages available for that. Trying to watch my time, Adriana. How much time do we have?
You're good. You're good.
Okay. And on the next slide, maximizing the claim settlement, there's a list here of things that should be done in the event you have sustained a loss. And the very first item is to be proactive. And I got to give you an example of something because it just goes to the heart of the matter. When I was in the hospital last year, I went through a series of things. I noticed that the anesthesia would be a problem for me at times. And in maybe the third procedure, I kept hammering away at it, and the surgeon ended up saying to me, you know, you're right. You have to be your own advocate. And I sat back and I was a little astonished by that. But it does go through every situation where there's issues. You have to be your own advocate and be proactive. And in being proactive, you have to understand the policy and how it applies to your loss. You should consider using experts that are appropriate. And in the initial stages of every claim, after the first visit by the insurance company adjusters, they will set up what's called a reserve and provide information to the insurance company to say, here's the damages we note, and this is what we think the loss is. Now, if for some reason they underestimate that reserve, and it ends up being that your loss significantly exceeds that, it'll be an uphill battle. And it could add months and months on to a claim. We had one situation in the Bahamas last year where a client hired us, maybe 4 or 5 months after the loss, after the hurricane hit. And the situation was one where the insurance company and their adjusters were saying, well, your loss does not exceed your deductible. And the deductible amount was some $600,000. It took perhaps another 8 months after we were retained, and the insurance company, for one aspect of the damages, paid $418,000. So whatever the reason was, the facts are the facts in that case, and they happen. So again, I'm going to, at the sake of being repetitive, you have to be proactive and help identify what losses are and quantify them. And the last item on the list is diminution of useful lives. If the salt water that is being carried into the property by the high winds gets into certain apparatus, but just electrical panels, and they really get in there, then things might be operating okay today, but within a half a year or a year, all of a sudden the repair costs are going to go up because there is a diminution or shortening in the useful life of that asset. And another significant thing to do is take photographs. Insurance company adjusters might not show up for a couple of weeks. Here in the Virgin Islands, when the airports were closed, it took weeks, and in some cases almost a month, before insurance company adjusters could arrive. And every property owner, every insured, has a responsibility to mitigate against further damages, which means also doing some cleanup. And if you do that, you have to take pictures first. Being proactive, if you have what's called extra expense coverage, you could either have pure extra expense coverage or it's part of business interruption. It allows you to incur costs to expedite the recovery and minimize your business interruption claim. I think that basically covers the points that I want to make, Adriana.
Okay.
And maybe there'll be questions back and forth that I could help clarify issues if they
I'm
exist.
sure there will. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Stan. Now we're moving on to Magnus. And let me set up Magnus's slides over here. There he goes. Magnus, are you there? You have to unmute yourself. There he is. Magnus? Hello? Okay, why don't we do the following? Let's answer a few questions, and if Magnus is able to go ahead and unmute himself from on his end, then we can go back to his presentation. Sound good? Yes? Okay.
That's fine. And,
All
and
right.
if necessary, and if necessary, I'm familiar with Magnus's, is it Magnus?
No, not yet. Okay, all right, so let's see. We have one question here. And let me open this up. We have a question from Kevin Francis, and he said he would like to set up a meeting to discuss the reserve. Is there a formal process, or is it as simple as calling the adjuster and requesting it?
Well, when the adjuster comes out, he's not going to be telling you that here's what he's setting up for the amount of the reserve. You have to engage him in a conversation and see if you can find out what he thinks the loss is. And that's how you go about it.
Okay.
And again, you know, a hotelier or other property owner has to be proactive and have their own experts. Because how do you know what the cost of certain things will be?
Right. Okay. Actually, Frank has a question for Scott.
Scott, one of the challenges now, I think it's a challenge that you may not have the answer for, but and I know there's no definitive answer at this point. But planning ahead, folks are doing their budgets for 2018, trying to get a better read on what they should budget in terms of knowing that there will be an increase in their premiums. What should they be budgeting for? What should they be planning for, just to be safe? In terms of what their premium increase may be, and around that, what are some things they can do to I guess on both sides of the equation to mitigate that impact, and the other side of the equation is to make sure that if they're not fully covered, that they have some exposure. How do they make sure they're covering all their bases as well? I know that's a loaded question, but I just thought I'd get a little bit more on that. Yeah.
Sure. Well, it's been early days so far. You know, these events have really taken place from the end of August, and we're now in the beginning of November. So we're, barely say 8 to 10 weeks since these events have begun. Now, as I might have mentioned, we have over 20 insurance companies that fight for the business here in Barbados. Many of them are just local insurance companies, but we do have about a half a dozen that run throughout the islands and have exposure throughout the various islands in the Caribbean. We have been put on notice, some via email, many of them through phone calls, and many as well through personal meetings here in our office or at the office of the insurers, simply to say there will be material increases coming up in your next renewal cycle. Now, in meeting with many of the insurance companies, a lot of the adjustment depends upon when their reinsurance renewals are for them. So you'll have some insurance companies with a renewal of January the 1st, others with April the 1st, others with July the 1st. So they are pretty much locked in to their insurance expense for the next certain period of time. When they come for their renewals with the UK markets and the like, that's when they're going to see an increase to their expenses, and in turn will pass that on to the respective clients. Having said that, we do have a few that have been mentioning that from November 1st going forward, there will be an increase. Some have given us an indication of what the increase is going to be. And I think it's just been not set in stone, but perhaps just a bit of a forewarning. we're looking at anywhere from a 10% to 40% increase in insurance rates and premiums in the next, I would say, 6-month cycle. And that's predominantly on property, inland and beachland properties.
Regarding, can you hear me now?
Does that depend on the Scott on the where you're located? So, if, for example, you're located in one of the most affected destinations, are you looking at a higher premium next year versus a place like Aruba that has had very little impact? It hasn't had any impact.
Right. Unfortunately, the Caribbean is pretty much lumped into one general region. So, Barbados, for example, we had very little impact by these storms. I think Harvey might have given us the largest scare when it passed just a bit south of us as a tropical storm. And there was some minor damage. A few houses on the island lost a roof, and a couple of retaining walls might have gotten damaged. I mean, really nothing to write home about. However, we will be seeing increased rates down here. So a lot of clients perhaps maybe coming to us and saying, well, we didn't get impacted at all. Why are my rates going up? But the short story is that it's where the reinsurance markets are looking at the Caribbean as a general region, and everybody is going to be impacted. Now, to say what level of impact is going to be applied for, say, Barbados to the Southern Caribbean versus Dominica and St. Kitts to somewhat more in the Northern Caribbean, we haven't yet heard as yet what that differential will be. But we are looking at somewhere in the 10 to 40% range. One of the things, I guess, would be that, as I mentioned, we have experienced reduced rates over the last 8 years, and that's been fantastic for our clients. Everybody is thrilled, and a lot of the renewal meetings actually open with the conversation of, hey, am I getting another 10% reduction this year? And I think, sadly, that conversation is going to be changing in the next renewal cycle.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Magnus is back. He got his audio back, so I think we can jump ahead to his presentation. And there we go. Magnus, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
All righty. Yes, sir. Just let me know when you want to change slides, okay?
Okay, well, you can put on the first slide. This is going to be pretty quick.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So, to wrap this up, I just kind of wanted to give the view from a hotelier and what we have done at Pelican Bay getting through these storms, and how we feel that we have been fairly successful. And to explain what Pelican Bay is, we are a commercial 184-room hotel with a mix of probably around 80% business and people who are coming to the island for a reason, and 20% of our business is what I would describe as tourism leisure. Therefore, our goal in a hurricane is always to remain open as much as we can, and definitely to open up as quickly as is possible after a storm. And we have kind of done this now a few times and become pretty good at it. So just to wrap up these basic things that we have been taught over the years, before the storm, checklists, checklists, checklists. Go through them, make sure you do everything that you have promised yourself that you were going to do after the last storm. Make sure you prepare in every possible way. What we have found extremely useful is to actually really look after our staff, is to build that loyalty, to make sure that you get them in as quickly as possible after the storm. And we have even started here now the last few times that 2 days before we go into this preparedness mode, we make sure that we give out some money to our staff so that they can actually look after their own homes and feel safe and secure during the storm. Stan mentioned it in his presentation, photos, photos, and photos, and photos again. We have 2-3 people that goes around the days before the storm and just takes photos everywhere. We prepare for the worst case scenario, which is that one of us would have to jump on a boat and go over to Fort Lauderdale and start working from there. So we make sure that we scan everything we need. We make sure that we upload it in the cloud. We make sure we have 3 backups of our computer system in different places. And we are basically ready to move our admin operation off the island. And then, of course, the obvious one is stock up. We want to make sure that we can operate straight after the storm. So we stock up on everything that we try to store in the most secure way. You can switch over to the next slide, Andrea. During the storm, very simple, stay safe, rest. We will all need it after the storm. And don't do anything stupid. It's how we stop every single meeting we have before or during a storm, is don't do anything stupid. Stay safe, rest, and don't do anything stupid. And can move on to my points after the storm. As quickly as possible, get a grasp of the situation that the property is in. And before you do anything, again, photos, photos, photos after the storm. Priorities, what are you going to start dealing with first? Make sure that as the staff starts coming in, that again, you look after them. They are the most valuable asset that you have. And what we have found is that the quicker you can manage to create some sense of normality, or as we call it, the new normal, you get people into their routines, and it will make the process of getting back quicker. Stan mentioned this thing about mitigating work. We found after Hurricane Matthew, being the hotel that we started immediately securing our roofs that were damaged, and you can actually see that on the photo here. And as this photo was taken, actually the loss adjuster pulled in to check into the hotel from our insurance company, and the first thing he said was, "Wow, you've already started repairing. Great, that means that you care and you don't want any more damage. I hope you have some good photos of what it looked like before." Often I hear from colleagues that they want to wait and do anything until they have had the insurance company there. I think that is, in my view, not a good idea. Start the work as soon as you can. You can evidence exactly what you have done. That is not a problem, and it shows your insurance company that you want to really get back in action again. Last point. Sorry, yes.
And the other thing too that was important that you did is identify some of those repairs as temporary repairs to mitigate further damages, and they were not permanent repairs, and there's a coverage for that. So you were great from the standpoint too of doing temporary repairs and identifying it as such.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Stan. Funny enough that we are actually now doing permanent work that we have taken our time to do to get the best prices for it, and there wasn't really such a rush, and we were able to do temporary work a year ago, and it's lasted perfectly fine for 1 year, and now we're doing the permanent repairs at actually a lower price than if we would have done it 2 months after the storm. And then my last point, which is down there at the bottom, which is kind of my own experience, having gone through this several times now. As a general manager, managing director of the hotel, you have so much to do that you need to find somebody who deals with the insurance claim for you. And that saves you a lot of aggravation. as Stan knows, we had a case of where our insurance company actually changed their loss adjuster on us 4 times in the first 8 weeks, and we had to start all over again each time. And it just, as a general manager, it just takes too much time to try to deal with this by yourself. And that was really my point, and I'm open to any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Magnus. So we're going to go ahead and move forward with some of the questions that we have here. Let's see. The first question I have is for Stanley. In case of a claim, is one able to claim additional costs due to lack of labor and material available on the island, not to mention price gouging by contractors?
Well, it will. I'm sorry, there was a bit of an interruption or just then. Could you repeat that, please?
Oh, sure. Can you hear me okay now?
Now I can.
Okay. The question was, in the case of a claim, is one able to claim additional costs due to lack of labor and material available on the island, not to mention price gouging by contractors?
Yeah, so what we're really addressing is what the increased cost of repair is as a result of the storm and everybody being busy. The claim should be for current cost to replace. As far as price gouging, it's really an issue that each of the governments start to address and try and put some controls on it. But the claim should be prepared based upon the current cost to replace.
Okay. Let's see. This would be, I guess, a question for Scott. What percentage increase can we anticipate moving forward? This is from William Bonbright.
We are looking at, again, between 10 to 40% rate increases. We in Barbados, at least in speaking with the insurance companies so far, I think they themselves are not fully able to grasp what the losses are going to be like in the various territories, and also what their reinsurance companies out in the UK markets are going to be charging to them when they come up for renewals. So it's a bit of a wait and see position at this point. We have been advising clients that you're going to be looking at between 10 to 40%, but we'll know perhaps something a bit more definitively as we get closer to the end of the year and even into the new year. As I mentioned, they have a few insurance companies where they don't come for their reinsurance treaty renewals until into July. So they're locked in at their cost right now, which is fine for them. But I think from an industry perspective, there will be a general increase across the board amongst all of the insurance companies.
Okay, let's see. Here's another question for Stan. Can Stan address the pros and cons of filing claims for damages for 2 storms, each doing different types of damage?
Yes. Separate claims would be required.
Okay, that was short and sweet. Good. Okay, and let's see. We have one more question. In reference to a hotel insurance... Go ahead.
Let me say this. Insurance policies do speak to the fact that if there's 2 events, typically within a 72-hour period, insurance companies can consider that one event. But if they're separated more, such as in the Virgin Islands, you had both Irma and Maria come through. And there are places where Maria did additional damages over and above what Irma did. And 2 separate claims have to be submitted, and there will be 2 deductibles that have to be addressed.
Okay. Frank has a question actually for you. I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say something else there when I spoke to deductibles.
Mhm.
And again, this goes to understanding your policy and knowing what it says. Typical deductibles for windstorm damage or claims is a percentage, 3%, 5%. Some property owners will go as high as 10% of the sum insured as for the deductible to save premium. But there are policies that for flood can say the deductible is a dollar amount as opposed to a percentage. So therefore, depending upon what your loss is in relationship to your sums insured, you need to address what the deductibles are. And I guess another thing too is in understanding your policies and in the underwriting when you purchase the insurance. If you have a sublimit for windstorm, you want to try to get the percentage deductible applied to the amount of coverage for windstorm and not the total insured value, which can be significantly different.
Gotcha. Okay. Frank, your question?
Hi, I have a question for any of the panelists. It's regarding business interruption coverage. I've had hoteliers tell me that it just adds too much to the premium, you know, and I just wanted to get a take on that. But also, does it apply to covering the costs for lost wages for employees, and if so, to what extent?
Yeah, it does. I mean, you know, what I call business interruption, a nickname for it if you want to say, is I call it buying insurance on insurance. Because the longer the claim drags out by the insurance company and monies are not given to the property owner, they can't do the repairs, and the business interruption period just goes on and on. Typical language in a policy speaks to the period of restoration being the period of time with due diligence and dispatch to do the repairs. But if the insurance companies do not give you the money to do the repairs, that typically will extend the period, the restoration period. And again, you in doing the claim, I guess if you look at my last slide, it speaks to business interruption insurance. The amount is basically calculated by taking your income that you would have earned plus your continuing expenses. The reciprocal of which is take your lost revenues less your non-continuing expenses. So if you're paying the payroll, it's a continuing expense. And coverages can be written with different terms for ordinary payroll exclusions. Maybe you only want 90 days covered or 6 months. And all that goes into the calculation of what the sum insured should be. And the higher the sum insured, the higher the premium. Scott, if you have anything to add to that, by all means.
Yes, I was actually going to say, you know, I think business interruption is very, very valuable, in particular with the hotel industry and, you know, call it the Caribbean product, restaurants and the like. You know, these industries are a substantial and significant backbone to the Caribbean economy. And in events where you have hurricanes that come in, and a hotel could potentially be down for 3 months, 6 months, perhaps even as long as a year, the business interruption covers the salaries of the employees that you so put under the policy. I mean, I think we've all been faced with challenges at some point in our lives where we've had to lay off workers for whatever reason. And, you know, in events like this where there's been a catastrophic event, the business interruption insurance covers the salaries of your employees. So your people, the ones that make your business survive and prosper, are protected. So I think business interruption is a very, very valuable insurance product, and I would strongly recommend that everybody that I believe that is on this webinar should pay specific attention to that product.
And let me make a distinction here when we talk about payroll costs. Is
10 minutes?
is that when we speak to ordinary payroll, what we're really saying is this does not include the salaries and compensation of the executives and managers. They would be covered because the insurance, the concept there is to get you back into business as soon as possible with the same level of efficiencies. So you want to be able to maintain your management people, but the ordinary people could include people like in housekeeping and what have you. And there, you just have to make a decision as to how long after an event you want to be able to pay the ordinary payroll people. Housekeeping, the people that take care of the grounds, and for what period of time, and it gets factored into the what the premium is, the sum insured. Now, if at some point, what we suggest, if there's no business interruption or there's minimal ordinary payroll, is try to use the those ordinary payroll people in the course of mitigation work and some property repair and get it into the building claim.
All right, gentlemen, we have 2 more questions, and then we are going to wrap up. One question coming from Ken. It says, in reference to hotel insurance policy, would loss of rent mean loss of earnings? I.e., would one expect that to mean loss of income, booking cancellations?
Well, I mean, if a hotel rents out space, for concessions and what have you, it's income that they would get, and it's part of the calculation of the business interruption. Now, I'm questioning whether there's more to that question or not. Talk about rental income. So maybe can we get some clarification from Ken to see if I can answer that better?
What I would recommend is, Ken, if you're still listening in, please go ahead and send Stan an email. His email is on the screen right now, and you guys he can give you more, and he can answer that question more in depth because we're running out of time, okay? And the last question is, it actually comes from 2 separate people, is how would you find someone who can deal with the insurance claim, as Magnus said? Is that a public adjuster, or are there project managers who would handle this? And then Karen also asked, how do I find a private adjuster?
But if I could jump in there, and perhaps I'm going to answer this question wearing 2 hats. So I'll be wearing my CGM Gallagher hat, being as an insurance broker. And that's exactly one of the principal benefits or purposes of an insurance broker, is to handle the claims on behalf of the client. So if we are, you consider that you have a claim, and if you are direct insured and not using a broker, then you are essentially fighting that fight with the insurance company and with the claims adjuster to ensure that you get the best reimbursement for your loss. With the engagement of an insurance broker, the broker is on the ground and is dealing with the insurance company and the adjuster on your behalf, and to ensure that you get the fairest representation for the loss. Putting on now my individual hat, before I was in the position I am in now, I can say that I have had a couple of losses or events, albeit perhaps insignificant, but events nonetheless where I had to deal with an insurance company on my own, compared to having to deal with my broker who handled that situation for me. And as Magnus alluded to, the use of a broker and a specialist takes away a world of headache that you would experience in any loss, whether it be a vehicular accident or a catastrophic loss from a hurricane.
And if I could just bounce in there, and because I think the practical question was, how do you actually find somebody? And I have worked with two advisors or adjusters or consultants, whenever what we're gonna call them for whatever reasons. And in both cases, I have basically asked for a list. I put together a little short list, and then I asked for some fellers in the some names of properties in the region that they have worked for before. And then I picked up the telephone and called those properties and asked to speak to general managers who are members of CHTA and said, is this a person that you would work with again? And that's what I based my decision on, who I chose on.
Okay.
Well, let me chime in, because I'm one of those guys that people would reach out to. Scott, based upon my experience throughout the Caribbean, most insurance brokers don't have the staff and the wherewithal to get involved with a claim as CGM does. You are more proactive that way than I think most other brokers. But, I guess, I've been out there and I've seen everything, and my own personal feeling is that people have to be represented by a firm that basically that's what they do. And if there's issues with coverages and what have you, it comes out in the claim process.
Okay.
Yes, you're definitely right on that. I mean, there are different levels of brokers. Perhaps luckily CGM Gallagher does have a full Caribbean reach. As I mentioned, we're in 8 islands. But of course, the due diligence lies in choosing your broker adequately and seeing who has the wherewithal to be on the ground and to represent you in the event of a claim or a loss.
Yeah, and CGM does a good job at that, but I think I don't find that anyplace else. And we've been involved in situations where there were problems with the coverage, and the property owner really needed an independent party to work on their behalf.
All right, gentlemen, well, we're at 11 o'clock. We're going to wrap up the webinar. And just before we let everyone go, I just wanted to remind folks that for those of you that are CHTA members, Mr. Smith offers a assessment of your insurance policies for free. And this is an exclusive CHTA benefit. So if you'd like more information on that, please reach out to Stan, and he will help you out. So there are many benefits to being a CHTA member. If you would like more information on that, please contact our Director of Membership Development, Marta Valdivia, and her email is marta@caribbeanhotelandtourism.com, or you can just go to our website and get more information there. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Frank to wrap up the event. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for participating. Frank?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for participating as well. I mean, our calls today, our panelists today have come from Barbados, Sweden, St. Croix, and Coral Gables, Florida. So the insurance industry is global, and as reflected in this call. Each of the panelists are members and supporters of CHTA, for which we're most grateful. We selected this panel based on the merit of the panelists and their companies. They're all incredibly great resources. So again, we want to thank them. Hopefully, our participants have found it useful and to their forward planning. Next webinar is when? In a couple of weeks on business resiliency
Yes.
and refurbishment and rebuilding for recovery.
Keep an eye out. We will post all of that information on our social media, as well as you'll get an email from us. So keep an eye out for the next webinar. Thank you all for participating, and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to help. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.